everyone, and welcome to the Eco Entrepreneurs Talk organized by the Singapore Global Network. I'm Lian from the Singapore Global Network, or SGN for short, and I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. So I think some of you joining us this evening or this afternoon have participated in previous events by SGN. And for those who are joining us for the first time, an especially warm welcome to you. So here at SGN, our team very much hopes to reach out to and keep in touch with, our Singapore citizens and residents who are now overseas, as well as anyone who has that affinity or interest in Singapore. SGN is part of the Singapore Economic Development Board, and we aim to build a global community of individuals with that shared experience and interest in Singapore. Hopefully, this global network will also help members of the community like yourselves to connect with one another and to also keep updated on the latest news and opportunities in Singapore. I'm very excited that today we have the privilege of hosting Jeff Yeo, who is the co-founder of Big Tiny, a Singapore startup with ecotourism as its ethos. Big Tiny builds tiny houses on wheels, which are primarily situated on vast rural land in Australia and New Zealand, giving city dwellers or tourists the opportunity to have a getaway and wake up in the great outdoors. And I'm sure that sounds really amazing to many of us right now. But more than that, Big Tiny also supports the landowners or farmers who own these rural land. So what exactly is a tiny house and how does it contribute to ecotourism and sustainability? What was the journey of starting Big Tiny like, especially expanding overseas? And what are some of the current challenges faced during this global pandemic? Well, we hope to share some of these insights on these topics over the course of this session. And a big thank you to everyone who had earlier submitted your questions to Jeff. So do continue to post any additional questions that you have using the Q&A tool, which you can find at the bottom of your screens. So today, Jeff will be starting with a sharing on Big Tiny, and then we'll get into a conversation later on to delve further into your topics of interest. So can I just invite Jeff to start with your sharing?
Hi, Leanne. Thank you so much. And a very good afternoon or evening to everyone, depending on where you are. I'm based in Singapore, and right now, actually, I'm in my office. Everyone is working from home, so I'm not wearing the mask, so that's just a disclaimer. So I shall start sharing my slides here. Yeah, and basically throughout this 1 hour session, I hope to be able to share as much as I can with each and every one of you, because I guess you guys have taken time off your busy schedule to attend this as well. I'll be answering questions along the way, and let me begin first by answering this one question from all the audience, which is his question was, how can someone with no experience get started with setting up their own business? So basically, to kickstart this presentation, I'd like to share this quote, which I thought was quite meaningful by Alan Cohen. Basically, what he said is, do not wait until the conditions are perfect to begin. Beginning makes the conditions perfect. So what I glean from this is basically the fact that no business model comes fully formed right at the start. So there's no better time to start than when you first had that idea and basically fine-tune the whole idea along the way. Yep. So it's the afternoon now, so you might be very sleepy. So I wanted to share this picture of me here, taken at one of my land partners' site in Seven Hills, Talaruk in Victoria itself. So the picture that Leanne shared with you earlier, that is the dressing that we usually wear and present ourselves in front of the media, in front of the public when we give talks. But this is the real us. A lot of us do not show the effort and the hard work that we put in, or the lives behind the facade that a lot of people think that the entrepreneurs live, but it's not as glamorous, I would say, but definitely a very fun journey. Okay, so this is the session overview of what I'm going to share with you today, basically running you through what is the definition of a tiny house, what this tiny house movement is about, and why this particular tiny house movement is slowly gaining popularity worldwide. I mean, even in Singapore, if you have access to Netflix, you'll realize that there's also Tiny House Nation by John and Zach, whom my team had the honor of actually meeting during one of the tiny house festivals that we hosted in Sydney earlier this year before the COVID outbreak. Then I'll move on to what Big Tiny is doing, our business model, our operations, and also share a bit about the operational process, some of the difficulties that we encountered during COVID-19 and how we overcome it. And finally, I'll end off with taking questions from the floor. So without further ado, let's begin. So tiny house itself, it is basically defined as any location or space and dwelling that is under 400 square feet in size. Big Tiny wise, we have a variety of different sizes of tiny houses, as well as the design and the size. So for now, what we usually go with, or what we found to be optimum, is something that is along the lines of 6 meters wide by 2.5 meters width. And then of course, height-wise is about 2.8 to 3.2, okay? These tiny houses, they can be bought off the shelves, or you can choose to build it on your own, based on your own customizations and preference. It can be laid on foundation, meaning we can actually build a tiny house on the ground, or if you prefer mobility or moving it around, traveling, you can build it up on a trailer base, okay? And in terms of power, water, sanitization, you can choose to have a off-grid model or a on-grid model. So what do I mean by off-grid model? Basically, it means outfitting your tiny house with solar panels at the top, so that actually provides the power to your electrical appliances inside. Um, On-grid basically means that you connect your tiny house to a main power supply that may be drawn out from your house, and the water supply as well. Then in terms of toileting system, I think it's very interesting. We have two modes. One is a composting toilet. That is something that might be a little bit more alien to Singaporeans per se. So composting toilet is a concept whereby after you finish your business, you actually cover your human waste with either sawdust or coffee grounds. Then what we do after that is we collect the human waste, we put it into a bigger compost bin, we treat it with enzymes, and thereafter you can actually use the human waste as fertilizers. So my land partners, some of them whom actually grows crops, they will use this as fertilizers for the crops. And of course, the one that we are more familiar with in Singapore is basically a toileting system that is connected to the main sewage system. Okay. So moving on, tiny house movement. So the tiny house movement actually originated from the United States sometime around 1970s. Of course, this is what was documented. It's basically a social movement that promotes living simply, or what we call the minimalistic way of living. So what happened back then was that a lot of people couldn't afford to pay the hefty mortgages, of course, that's connected to buying a normal house. So what they did was they tried to build their own house and try to keep the space small. So not only does this actually enable financial freedom, what it does is also it forces them to think about whether the things they consume, the things they buy is small enough to fit into their house. So if, for example, you buy less stuff, you consume less stuff, it actually eventually leads to less wastage. And of course, this is much, much better for the environment. You reduce your carbon footprint overall. Okay. So tiny house wise, if you look at a tiny house, you may think that you can only use it for accommodation, but it is in fact very versatile in terms of the types of usages that you can use it up for. So first one being you can use it as a home office. I would say this would be particularly applicable during COVID-19. Of course, not in Singapore, but in Australia, imagine having a tiny house in your backyard. So you can actually have your Zoom meetings, your conference calls without disturbance from your kids or your family members. You can use it as a music studio. You can use it as a workshop to conduct your workshops and stuff like that. Singapore-wise, interestingly, we rented 3 of our tiny houses out to Plaza Sing last year during the Great Singapore Sale. So some of the brands inside Plaza Sing actually took up the tiny houses and used them as a pop-up store. Okay, and of course, last but not least, you can use it as a guest house when your friends stay over, or a holiday home that you can place in Australia and use it as your accommodation when you travel over. Okay, why are tiny houses so popular? I would say a part of it has to do with how people, more and more people are actually seeing that tiny houses is an alternative housing solution of the future. It can also actually be used to house the homeless, because if you build a really low cost tiny house and you just increase the number of houses to a village size, you can actually have a house quite a number of homeless with a very small budget, which is actually something that we are also exploring in Australia as well. You can also use it as a concept for retirement villages where there's a dedicated tiny house for each of the old folks, and then a communal area where the old folks can do gardening activity and stuff like that. And as mentioned earlier, you create a lesser carbon footprint. So living in one, I think we read some research earlier on, just by virtue of fact of that you live in a tiny house, you are actually reducing your carbon footprint by up to 48%. Okay, and last but not least, again, is the cost. Okay. Okay, so the tiny house wise also, I would say it has created quite a trend basically in the COVID-19 situation. So even pre-COVID, what we have noticed in the trend for people choosing to go for a holiday is that they tend to prefer experiential kind of accommodation as opposed to the older generation where we favor the luxury hotels. Okay, and with the pandemic itself, this trend was further amplified because people now actually prefer smaller getaways. They do not prefer to actually put up at a hotel where there's a huge density of hotel guests coming from all over the world. And the third factor, even the top private CEOs are predicting nowadays, is that they would prefer a space where they have access to outdoor amenities. So if you look at the picture on the right here, this is one of our tiny houses that is in Beaconsfield in Victoria. So other than putting our tiny house there, the wheels are hidden, by the way. So the wheels are one of our USP. I'll actually explain this later in the business model side. What we do is we also build up outdoor decking to increase the square footage of the house, and we equip it with a outdoor sofa. We throw in some fairy lights for the ambience. We have a barbecue pit here with an umbrella in case it rains or it can shade you during the day. And we also have a bonfire area where you can actually crowd around and have a chit chat, have a nice beer, kick back and relax with your friends or family. Yeah, so this is the kind of experience that we are trying to create for city dwellers like probably Singaporeans, because we are mostly tethered to our digital handphones, our smartphones, our iPads and stuff like that. So this is the lifestyle that we want city dwellers to actually enjoy every once in a while. You take a break, yeah. But of course, having said that, in running an accommodation business thus far, we also realize that sometimes Wi-Fi is still essential. So we still have Wi-Fi coverage in our locations. Yeah. Okay. So this slide, and then there was Big Tiny. So some questions asked from the audience was basically, what's the inspiration behind Big Tiny? So this is a very interesting question. So basically, I was sharing with Leanne earlier before the session started. My partners and I, Adrian and Dave, among the three of us, we have a total of 10 kids. So we really love the Australian farm stay concept. So basically, when Adrian was first conceptualizing this, he just came back from his farm stay along the Great Ocean Road region. So what we like is similar. So we have a liking for farm stays because of the big open space, the proximity to nature, and all this actually distresses us a lot. So the first business idea we had, to be very honest, was we were thinking about buying over a farm that was quite popular with Singaporeans, and then of course renting it out as a farm stay. But because we have run businesses before, so we know that in order for a business to be successful, it needs to be sustainable and of course scalable. So if we were to go around acquiring farms like that, the capital outlay would be huge. And of course, if we fail, then we might have to become farmers ourselves, which is something that we're not prepared to do. So we basically came back and we thought about it more, and we decided to combine the very trending ecotourism concept along with the tiny house movement. Of course, because the tiny houses are relatively cheaper in nature, then it's something that is worth exploring, and it is very much scalable. So that is how the whole Big Tiny business came along. Yeah. So in terms of the business model, Big Tiny is actually a holding company. We under Big Tiny, we have Tiny Assets, which is the sales and marketing arm. We have Build Tiny, which is our building and construction arm. We have Tiny Away. Tiny Away is actually a hospitality arm that takes care of all the bookings and accommodation. And I think last year we also acquired a company called Tiny Real Estate. So Tiny Real Estate itself is a platform that deals with the buying and selling of anything that's related to tiny house. So brand new tiny houses, secondhand tiny houses, people who have land to rent out. Yep. So if you look at this forms a very good ecosystem, and we wanted to own subsidiaries and all the functions that is related, not only to provide our clients with a 360 solution, but having this structure also enables us to control the quality of the products and services that we offer. Yeah. So all these entities by themselves also have their own revenue model. So it makes it a very, very stable, a financially stable business model here. Yeah. And of course, underneath all this, what we are also trying to achieve with this model, other than enabling city dwellers to uh, recharge and reconnect with nature, we also wanted to try to disrupt the traditional real estate model. Because I think in Singapore-wise, all of us, we love our properties and stuff like that. But if you were to do property, if you are doing property investment, the biggest pet peeve we have is that your normal real estate is not movable. So in this business model of ours, we actually deploy tiny houses at various spots throughout Australia, I mean, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria. So what we do is we curate the pieces of land. So it can be either an animal farm, a fruit orchard, a vineyard, or places with exceptional scenery where we could see ourselves creating an experiential accommodation on site. We always start off with pulling or rather towing one of our tiny houses to the land. What we do after that is that we will list this accommodation up on all major booking websites like Airbnb, Trivago, Booking.com, Expedia, etc. And what we do is we will monitor the occupancy rate throughout the next 3 to 6 months. Of course, after having deployed it, our little trick here is that we will also invite social media influencers in the traveling space to come and stay and give us a feedback, and of course, provide us with some photos and videos of the place so we know how we can further improve on the whole experience itself. Okay. So going back to the occupancy rate wise, what we do is we monitor occupancy rate for 3 to 6 months. If it's ideal, for example, what we will do is we will pull more tiny houses in, but of course, all the time maintaining the privacy of each unit. And of course, for example, a piece of land that we curate, it doesn't work out, the occupancy rate is not as ideal. What we do is, or rather there's nothing stopping us from pulling it out of the place. So the cost to us is relatively low. Yeah. So that is our business model for Big Tiny. And of course, after having tested out the occupancy rate for the various land areas, just now remember Leanne was mentioning about how we are partnering with landowners. So the gap we discovered in Australia is basically that Australian, in the more rural side of Australia, outskirts, basically they own huge pieces of land, and their land is actually sitting there wasted because most of the time they will only utilize about 20-30% of their land. So the rest is just there sitting pretty. So our proposition to the landowner is that we'll enter into a collaboration where we do a profit share. So by allowing us to put our tiny houses on their land and doing a profit share when people stay. So it is a win-win on both sides because this is additional revenue that's generated from their unused land. And for us, basically, it mitigates our risk and our operational costs involved with each deployment. Yeah. Okay. Then basically, once we find out that a particular spot, a particular region in New South Wales or Victoria has a very high occupancy rate phase two of our business, we are also into resort developments. So now, instead of buying a piece of land and not knowing the historical data of that, this model actually enables us to find out very accurately what is the occupancy rate of that particular region, the tourist footfall, domestic traveling and everything. So when we go on to purchase that piece of land, we know for sure that the occupancy rate has been tested before. So it no longer becomes a guessing game, like the traditional real estate investment model, whereby you buy a plot of land, you probably know it until you start renting it out or marketing it on the market. And if your bet is wrong, basically you are stuck with a very huge quantum, or rather a huge asset that you probably will not make a profit on. So this is the way we conduct our businesses in Big Tiny as well. We try to benefit the environment, we try to benefit the locals, either through this land partner ship model, or we also employ the locals there. So in terms of the operations, how we work is that our tiny houses are prefab and manufactured from our factory in Malaysia. They are then flat packed and then shipped across to Australia. So depending on where we want to deploy the tiny houses, if it's in New South Wales, we'll send it across to our assembly factory in New South Wales or our assembly factory in Victoria. So there is where they'll build up the whole house and they will send it over to the designated land site. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to keep it very short so that we can answer more questions. So if you look here, just like to share videos of how fast it takes to assemble our tiny house. So maybe I'll start with this Malaysia one. Basically, they are the same. So I'll just play it both for you. Okay, so of course this is a time lapse. So the time taken to actually build up or assemble one of our tiny houses is something under 3 hours. So this was a huge improvement from our very first house that we started to assemble. And our design and building assembly methodology is also patented, because our ultimate aim for Build Tiny is to have tiny houses that we can ship out to our clients worldwide, and they can assemble it on their own if you want to. Yeah, but of course they all meet the various countries' building regulations. Yeah. Okay. This is a video that showcases what they experience with our tiny houses is like. So I'll just keep quiet for now.
Days run, nights fall away. Streetlights guide me, they show me the way. Oh, 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 take my hand, I'll lead you home. Escape our fate, and walk alone. Turn down the lights tonight, the moon's our guide. We dance, we sing, we live, we love tonight.
Yeah, so basically this is how a typical experience at our tiny house is like. We have also taken care to basically curate the activities, the food offered at every one of our tiny house. So in terms of the location as well, they are carefully thought out. So for example, if you are taking a trip out from the city in Sydney and making your way up to the Blue Mountains, you might find a few tiny houses scattered along the way where you can actually take a break. So you might be, for example, learning to do horse riding at one of our tiny houses, staying one night there, and then you might be off on your way and perhaps feeding farm animals on the second, and then until you get to the Blue Mountain, your ultimate destination. Yeah, and the experiences that we try to create for our guests is also a very local and authentic one. Basically, if you order a breakfast set, for example, the eggs may come from the animal farm next door, the milk may be from the dairy farm, the wine may be from the winery that is down the road. So all this actually reduces the carbon footprint uh, that is generated from tourism activities. Because I think there was one question that was someone was asking about how the carbon footprint is reduced in terms of tourism. Yep. Okay. Then this is a guest review. I'll show you later. This is actually just some photos that I took when I was on holiday on a farm stay in Australia. I think it's in Brisbane. So just so you know, the horses aren't photoshopped. They are real horses taken at that point in time. So this was actually one of the moments, the aha moments that struck when we first started this business. So still love farm stays to date. Whenever we travel to Australia for work trips, we do stay at our own tiny house. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'll end this sharing. I'll go into the Q&A mode. So I think you'll have a lot of questions coming in as well. I'd like to end this with a quote saying that you may have to fight a battle more than once to win it, a quote by Margaret Thatcher. So I think this holds a lot of meaning as well, because when you are running a business, it is for sure not smooth sailing. You are not really able to anticipate everything that comes along. So take, for example, this COVID-19 pandemic. So none of us actually anticipated this. I would just like to say that I think we are very lucky in terms of for the business itself. We are definitely affected in a way because with the Melbourne lockdown, our Victoria tiny houses, basically we have shut the rental business there. We are depending on New South Wales, but I think the good thing is that majority of our guests that are booking our tiny houses are still the locals themselves. So this local domestic traveling strategy is working fine now. But we also did quite a bit of operational changes with regards to, for example, the sanitation of the tiny houses after each and every guest checks in and checks out. We try to introduce contactless check-in as well, making sure that our land partners, land hosts are safe and protected from the virus as well. So these are some of the things that we try to adapt. So I think with this, I would like to end my sharing and go into the Q&A section. Hope you have learned a bit and I've answered some of the questions that came in. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for sharing about, how you and your co-founders started Big Tiny, the inspiration behind it and what a tiny house actually is and like how the whole process is as well. Yeah, so we've gotten quite a few questions in the Q&A. And also, like I mentioned earlier, some questions that people submitted before as well. So maybe just to get started, you mentioned about how for Big Tiny, you work a lot with local partners. So the farmers or, people who own the land or maybe other partners in the tourist industry as well. So given that, Big Tiny is a Singapore startup and you and your team are based in Singapore, how was the whole process like, kind of expanding overseas in that sense? How did you get started with, at the very beginning, looking for partners?
Right. I would say when we first started, it was really grinding and hustling all the way. We went to Australia. When we drove around, we tried to look around for pieces of land that we ourselves find that we want to stay there. Then we did the usual, so we did door knocking and stuff like that, and then sharing with them our concept. Then the people probably thought we were crazy, three Asian kids driving around and presenting their pitch deck to them door to door. But of course, along the way, we were quite lucky in the sense that we happened to knock on the doors of one of the council members, and he fell in love with our concept, which I guess because we try as much as we can to give back to the locals or the countries that we're operating in. So he introduced us to a lot of people in the network. We eventually joined the Australian Tiny House Association as well. And of course, if you talk about starting up in Singapore, I guess is a very good place to start up because there's a lot of networks, like for example, Singapore Global Network, with one of them. They can connect with people across the globe, I would say. And we also got a lot of support from Enterprise SG and a lot of government grants. But of course, if you talk about in Australia itself, I would guess it's about the effort that you spend in trying to look for these people. And once you start the ball rolling, it becomes easier and easier because once you have a tested model, more and more people would want to come in and participate in this whole business model of ours. Yeah.
That's great. And what has your experience been, I guess, positioning your business in a different environment altogether? Have there been any challenges with cultural differences or anything?
Yeah, of course. So we first experienced this when we organized a very big scale tiny house festival in Sydney. So it was our first time organizing, firstly, a large scale event. And secondly, it's a large scale event that is overseas. So when we started the publicity and everything, the websites, the marketing collaterals, we designed it according to like what we thought looked nice, but apparently our English, the style of writing is also not very appropriate, I would guess. Yeah, so we were speaking to our Australian colleagues and stuff like that on how we could improve on the aesthetics, the way we write and everything. So thereafter, the interesting thing is the response increased. Yeah, then of course, getting to know them. That's why for my partners and I, or even our team, when we travel down to Australia, we make it a point to stay as much as we can in our own tiny houses because we treat each and every one of our land partners as family. So we'll visit them, we'll find out what's going on, what are the local nuances and stuff. And I think till date, we have become quite close. And I think most of our land partners also enjoyed hosting, and we have a lot of our hosts go out of their way to entertain the guests, make them feel at home and stuff like that. So it's something that is really heartwarming. I would just like to share that. I mean, it may seem very tough at the start, but if you are sincere, if you are passionate enough, you are determined enough, it will definitely reap rewards along the way. Yeah.
And earlier you mentioned also when you guys first started, you had to get the buy-in of the local councils as well. So we do have a question from one of the audience in the Q&A asking if there were difficulty with obtaining council planning permits, or I guess maybe the larger question is, were there any regulatory challenges in that sense setting up?
Okay, I would say that the tiny house movement in Australia is just starting to spread. So in terms of council permits and stuff, it is still in a gray area. And okay, to the Singaporeans, you might not know, but basically in Australia, different states have different rules and regulations. So what we usually do when we partner up with a land partner is we will advise them to go to the local councils, share with them what they are doing, and then of course obtain their blessings. But a lot of times, basically, tiny houses are ruled as caravans. They are basically classified as caravans in Australia. So as long as it's not a permanent fixture, I guess yeah, it's great. It's great. But we always encourage our land partners to get it properly approved as well. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. And I guess aside from that, we also have quite a lot of questions, I guess, on the very specific mechanics of, how a tiny house works and all that. So maybe we can go on to those questions. We have some questions on how you move these tiny houses. So, like for example, if you had a tiny house on a certain piece of farmland, for example, how would you move it if it were to be moved to a different land?
Okay, in Singapore, we moved it before, so we have one in our office. Later, if you have time, I can bring you on a tour of the one in our office. But usually, what we do is we use a tow truck to move the tiny house. But in actual fact, any four-wheel drive with a tow ball, you can simply connect the tiny house to the tow truck or the four-wheel drive, and you can just move it because all our tiny houses were designed with road-going regulations in mind. So they do not exceed the vehicle width of 2.5 meters, nor do they exceed the height of 4.2 meters. Yeah.
Okay. And also have some questions also on how, I guess on the materials used for building the tiny houses and how that kind of withstands different climates. So I mean, in Australia, we can have pretty violent storms and winds and also quite brutal summers where the temperatures get really high. Maybe you can share a bit more about that.
Okay, so the tiny house, basically we design it in a way that it can withstand all seasons, I would say. Most, not extreme coldness, I would say. That's why in Australia it's still fine. So each of the prefab panel, it consists of 3 layers, namely number one, the composite wood exterior cladding. So that is a very environmentally friendly material. It is very durable as well. So that is the outer side. In between the outer layer and the inner layer is actually a layer of insulation. So the material we use is called rock wool. So rock wool basically is made from volcanic rocks. So it's very, very eco-friendly. It's abundant in nature as well. And it has a very good insulating capabilities. And in terms of the inside, we use a waterproof gypsum board and interior wall panels depending. So this basically also ensures that we keep our maintenance costs very low, meaning that they are in panels. So if a specific panel is damaged, for example, you just need to replace the specific part. You do not have to change the whole wall or the whole cladding itself. Yeah.
Okay. And speaking of cost as well, I think
Hmm.
we also have a question about how do you maintain the tiny houses when they are used for temporary accommodation? So, for example, I
Hmm.
guess like cleaning the tiny houses or changing the bed sheets, things like that as well.
Okay. So you maintain it the same way as you maintain your house, but of course with more stringent standards. In this model of ours, because we are operating remotely, the HQ is in Singapore. We have ops team down and a city state manager down in the various states, the 2 states that we're operating in. But the cleaning, the operation wise, the QC is actually done by our land partners. So what we do, like for example, Airbnb has a cleaning fee of
Yeah.
$50, for example. We will give this entire $50 to them, and they'll be in charge of making sure that the cabin is turned over before the next guest comes in. Yeah. So similar to this, also like to share that earlier I mentioned you can order breakfast and stuff like that. You can do horse riding. So all these are actually paid in full to the landowners as well, because for this they are the ones that put in the effort. So we do not take a cut. Yeah, so that is really out of our heart to want to help them achieve another source of income, because most of them being farmers, they are actually at the mercy of Mother Nature. So if there's prolonged droughts or whatnot, the crops may not produce as much revenue for them. Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
And there's also some interest in the amenities within each tiny house.
Hmm.
Maybe you could share more about, is it really like living in an actual house? Do you have all the same amenities just in a smaller space?
Yeah. So the amazing thing is, I think even myself, when we first thought about this idea, we were just picturing ourselves whether we can squeeze all of our daily activities into a house that is so small. So all our tiny houses actually come with a queen size bed. It can be on the loft or it can be a single level unit. Very comfortable. Tested it ourselves. We have your comforters, your quilt covers. We have most importantly, an aircon. So that can be used for heating as well. Some of our tiny houses, we also have a small fireplace inside, a small fire belly, complete with the chimney. But what we have discovered is it only mostly appears in people's Instagram feed as a very lovely feature inside the house. We have a fully equipped kitchen. So there's a hot plate cooker, hot water boiler, bread toaster, a fridge, everything you need, even condiments to do simple cooking. Of course, you can't do those heavy cooking like char kway teow or fried rice and stuff like that. But steak, oysters, stuff like that is fine. We also have a toilet with hot water shower. Yeah. So if you think about that, it's actually quite complete. And also because of the fact that we don't want our stay too much in the house. So this is actually just enough for them, I would say, to do the cooking. Because actually most of our guests do their cooking outside the house in the barbecue pit, for example, because the scenery is very amazing and you want to be outdoors for that.
Yeah, it sounds quite all sufficient, and it will be quite amazing to be having char kway teow in a in the farmland in the great outdoors.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about aside from, I mean, we talked a lot about, the tiny houses being used for tourists or, for travelers, so more for temporary accommodation.
Hmm.
We have some questions on, I guess, other usages of the tiny houses as well. So I think for one is, are there long-term accommodation users of the tiny houses?
So I would say in terms of long-term accommodation users is like what I shared earlier, it can be used for low-cost housing, or it can be used for retirement villages, or even like restaurants, because the amazing thing about our building methodology or how we build our tiny houses is that it's like Lego. So you can build it to be a U shape if you want to, S shape, whatever shape you want, as big as you want or as small as you want, as long as they are a multiples of 1.1 meters, because that's the width of our panels. Yeah, and we are all constantly trying to cut down on the weight, but not compromising the structural integrity of the tiny house. So you can actually build up a tiny house with just 3 people, yeah, in under 3 hours, depending on how fast you are. The third person is actually for safety.
Yeah, that's quite important as well. Yeah. Okay. Maybe just moving on to another topic. You talked about ecotourism earlier as well, and sustainability. I guess maybe how would you say that, the whole house movement, how does it contribute towards sustainability in the tourist industry? Because I mean, the tourist industry is also, people have said that, it may not be the most environmentally friendly because, there is carbon footprint and all that as well.
Mm. Uh, I would guess the advantage again, other than the costs, and of course the lower carbon footprint generated, is
Mm.
probably the mobility. Because I would say you would choose to stay in, or rather when you go traveling, you would want to be at many places or visit as many places as you want, or experience as many different locations as you want. So if you were to go down the traditional route of building up a whole multi-story complex, a hotel, for example, um, you probably won't be able to see the same guests more than a certain number of times. But if you keep it small scale, you maintain the whole privacy, for example, you can have it set at many different locations. So even because of our tiny houses being built on wheels, we can even like have moving locations. So placing it maybe in the Yarra Valley for a quarter, and then moving it to an apple farm when it's harvesting season, so you can experience different things. Yep, yep.
Okay, yeah. Um, and we also had an earlier question. We know that, yeah, big tiny houses now are mostly in kind of more remote and more rural land.
Hmm.
How do you see tiny houses, for example, maybe being built or being applied in denser urban environments? Would that work as well?
Okay, I would say it might work, but the price of land in the more dense area, in the city area, urban areas, is definitely higher. So when cost comes into play, people would naturally want to build as high as they can. Yeah, but if you ask me, I would still say that there is space for tiny houses there, in terms of, for example, using little nooks and crannies of unutilized space. So that is where I see tiny houses being surviving in an urban environment. So small spaces where you can't build with your traditional building construction methods. Yeah.
Okay. And maybe just move on to another topic now, which is also, I guess, the challenges that Big Tiny has been facing this year, especially with, the COVID-19 pandemic that's going on. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier as well, but
Hmm.
maybe on the flip side of the challenges, have there been opportunities that have arose from this? And some people also ask about, how has the demand been for domestic tourism?
Okay, so I guess I'll start with the easier ones. Domestic tourism, very happy to share. I think the Australians love our concept, and also because of our lovely hosts. Because when you run a hospitality business, other than making sure that the accommodation they stay in is comfortable, is clean, is small, in our case, the face-to-face interaction between our host and the guest plays a very important part. So before we decide whether or not to partner with a specific landowner, we do speak with them at length to understand, what's their character like and stuff like that. So that's why, happy to share, we have been, I think, the sixth or seventh consecutive winner of the Superhost status on Airbnb. our average rating is about 4.95 out of 5 stars. So in terms of the demand, I would say we're doing very well locally lah. Yeah. Then if you talk about opportunities, I guess we in Australia, we also managed to be shortlisted for a few design and construction awards from the Australia side. So that to us was an achievement in itself. Because Singapore-wise, we have won some awards as well in terms of enterprise, the emerging enterprise awards and stuff like that. Then if you talk about other opportunities, I would say when we hosted the Tiny House Festival in Sydney, because we actually went in sort of incognito, because what we wanted to do was to really push the tiny house movement in Australia. So instead of restricting it to just our tiny houses, we actually opened the festival up to other tiny house builders in Australia as well, because we wanted the festival goers to see what's the array of tiny houses available in the market and not just ours. Yeah, and also in between the tiny house tours, we also invited John and Zach from Tiny House Nation from the States. We also had Bryce Langston from a famous YouTuber from New Zealand to come and share their experiences. We had the president of the Australian Tiny House Association and a few other influential characters in the tiny house scene in Australia come join us and share about the things that they learn of tiny house building. So this actually opened us up to a lot more opportunities of collaborating with people from across the globe other than Australia.
And that's really great to hear as well. And I mean, I think all of us are, also looking forward to what we now call, looking forward to what we hope to see as the new normal post COVID-19, hopefully. In your view, what do you think the tourism and hospitality industry will look like after COVID?
I guess people will be more selective in terms of their location choice, their accommodation choice because of COVID. But of course, at the very start, I guess once restrictions are more eased, people will go into a traveling frenzy for sure. Yeah, like
there are flights to nowhere now as well. A lot of airlines are doing that.
and that. Yeah, but I guess they'll be very selective with their choice of accommodation, their choice of location and stuff like that. And I guess also through this, maybe they would want to spend more quality time with their loved ones, and of course look for places where it's less dense and where they can probably have some private space to themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one thing that quite a number of people have asked as well is, does Big Tiny have any plans to expand to new markets? So maybe beyond Oceania, and someone was mentioning Tasmania as well.
Yeah. So all along we had expansion to other countries or overseas as one of the items on our roadmap. But of course, for us, we are risk averse in a sense. So what we usually do is we make sure that the first country that we start in is profitable, the model is sustainable, is workable. And then thereafter, what we hope to achieve is actually to work with local partners, because to be very honest, when we first started this Australian operations there's a long and steep learning curve at the very start. So it took us quite a while and stuff like that to get things up and running to the state that it is today. So the thing is that we have always wanted to expand to other countries, but with the help of locals that we can partner with, we can trust, be it either a joint venture or a franchise model. So the expansion to other regions, other countries is definitely on the table. Yeah, and Tasmania maybe coming soon. We're aiming Queensland, Southern Australia first. So these plans are already kickstarted, but because of the COVID-19, we are slowing it down. But we are still sending houses over to New South Wales and Victoria in preparation for the travel restrictions easing. Yeah, and the demand to go up. Yeah.
Well, hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. So maybe just since we're coming to the end of this session, maybe we'll just end off with a few more personal questions. Someone was asking whether before you started, in Big Tiny, did you have any background in architecture, or ecotourism and all these, or what was your background maybe?
Okay.
You could share that.
Totally no experience in tiny houses or stuff like that. I used to be from the Singapore Navy. Thereafter, after I finished my bond, I spent a huge part of my life in an advertising agency doing advertising. And then I started a social enterprise that is in Bangkok, helping working women work in safer environments, but earn more money. And yeah, that's my experience, but totally no experience in this space. I have experience in branding and marketing and sales, so that is the part that I'm handling in Big Tiny. But
Mm.
I would say it's interesting in the sense that it cuts across and it is not hard to pick up. Yeah, because I saw one of the questions that is like, what motivated you through difficult times? I would say that having a very positive mindset is really important, because when you are positive, you will just keep trying and trying, and of course you must love the work that you do. Yeah, and it's a very different ball game when you are the business owner or you are part of the management team, because whenever you think of giving up, it's not a personal decision, because if you give up, the livelihoods of your staff will be affected. The people that you work with, like the land partners in Australia. So there's a lot of things involved. So being positive actually keeps you going and motivates you to continue on, not for yourself, but also for these people as well. Yeah.
That's Yeah, totally agree with that. Maybe just one final question before we end off today. If you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your maybe your university self, or to your when you first started work, maybe what is that one advice you would tell your younger self?
Oh, yeah, I saw that question. Then I was thinking to answer truthfully or the
We can
political.
have both.
I mean, if it's truthfully, then I'll say not to go clubbing as much and drinking as much. Well, usually, yeah. But if
You
you
only
ask,
live once.
yeah, you only live once. So that is that. But of course, if you ask me, I would say university time is a time where, other than your studies, other than enjoying yourself, it is a good time to start thinking about ideas that you want to execute, or if there's something that you want to do in life, start a startup, for example. That is actually the best time to do, because you have the luxury of time. You are still young. Because as you go along in your life stages, there will be more and more things that you have to be worried about. And of course, not to forget that when you get older, you are generally more scared of everything, scared of falling, scared of this, scared of that. So, when advice I'll give to myself would be, dare to dream, dare to try and achieve what you want, because it doesn't matter if you fail, but at least you tried it. I mean, it's very cliche, but you will still have the runway to try and fail quite a number of times before you start to have real responsibilities, like a family, for example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing with us. So that's all the time that we have for today, and a big thank you to everyone in our audience for taking the time to join us today. I hope that everyone has gotten valuable takeaways from Jeff's sharing, as well as from each other's questions that you have submitted. So we would really love if you could take just less than 3 minutes to share with us your feedback regarding this talk and this event. I've just popped the link to the survey in the chat function. So if you could take some time to do that, that would be really great as well. It would really help, our team at the Singapore Global Network better understand what works, how we can do better, and most importantly, what you, our audience, finds engaging and beneficial as well. So I would really like to extend my appreciation to Jeff for spending this past 1 hour with us, sharing very interesting and candid anecdotes, as well as your real life experiences, not just starting Big Tiny, but also your strategies implemented, and how you're overcoming the challenges, especially during this year. I'm sure many of us are looking forward to when we can travel again. I know I definitely am. And I hope, Jeff, that you and your partners will be able to do your trips to Australia soon, and maybe we can grab a coffee here when you're here.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, but before we end off, can I
Yeah.
just do a swipe of my video to show the tiny house in our office?
Yeah, totally. We would love that.
So you can see that is the tiny house in our office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So our office has enough space. We used to have two of these tiny houses, but because of the increase in the number of staff, we had to dismantle one and ship it to Australia.
Oh, so you actually had two tiny houses
Yeah,
in
like
there.
a single level and the one with a loft. Yeah, both in our office. Yeah, because we wanted to try building it ourselves as well.
Nice, nice. And is that functional? Do you guys like take your coffee breaks or your lunch breaks in there?
No.
Okay, great. Okay,
Thank you so
thank you
much.
so much again, Jeff, and thank you everyone. Oh, just one more thing as well. I did see a couple of questions
Mm,
from people who are looking to maybe reach out to Jeff or to bring this conversation further as well.
yeah,
You can always find Jeff and myself as well on LinkedIn. And yeah, maybe I'll pop our LinkedIn links to everyone as well in an email after this.
yeah.
Okay, so thanks everyone so much for your time. Thank you, Jeff, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.